Greetings and welcome. I am your host, Jason Miles. And thank you for joining us for another episode of This is Revolution Podcast. This is our bi-monthly stream with our good friends Matt and David over at Left Reckoning. But David is on break and won't be joining us. But we still have a very informative show for you planned nonetheless. After the show, if you're a patron, we'll be doing a recap of the Give Them a Revolution live show that happened this past Sunday at the Terragram Ballroom in beautiful, sunny Los Angeles, California. Real quick, a couple of things before I bring in the fellas. If you haven't done it yet, please hit subscribe, and of course, don't forget to hit that notification bell so you are alerted whenever we go live. Now that I'm done with the live show, there's a lot more stuff we have in store for you guys for the end of the year show-wise. We're going to be adding more stuff, even more stuff. Just yesterday, we did our monthly Mau Mau Hour with Pascal Robert and Dr. Paul McComb, where they discussed the current situation in Haiti. If you haven't seen it, go check it. It's up now. If you want to show your support for TIR, then let the people know with TIR merchandise. Who doesn't want to have Pascal Robert's smiling face on a mouse pad, on a mug, or on a tee? www.thisisrevolutionpodcast.com is where you can get all that stuff. Also, news surfaced recently on the passing of Mike Davis. I got the chance to interview Mike Davis early last year, and I've posted the clip of our conversation where he speaks about the failures of the Bernie campaign efforts, defeat in 2016 and 2020, and so much more. Davis's work has been instrumental in what I do here on TIR. When Ben Burgess was down here in Mexico, we had a good conversation about Davis. And I remember us talking about the life that he led, the amazing life that he led, and how he chose to go out on his own terms, surrounded by loved ones and family, still sending out messages of hope for the left until the end. If you haven't done it, check out City of Quartz, a very prescient read. Now, let me bring in your Thursday night Revolutionary Reckoning news crew. First and foremost, let me bring in my homie, my dog, my co-host, my co-pilot, the man of the Mau Mau Hour, Pascal Robert.
Peace and greetings to the chat. Peace and greetings to the audience. Peace and greetings, Jason Miles.
How are you?
Doing all right, Comrade Jason. Had a great Mau Mau Hour. Also, if you want to check out a couple of appearances I've done recently, talking about the situation in Haiti, I was on Pod Damn America last week, and I also did the Brianna Joy Gray Bad Faith podcast.
Did you let Brianna know that I think her and I need to be a Wakanda of podcasting power couple?
I do not want to go down that particular route.
What is it going to take for her to notice me? Notice me.
We've been on. She's been on our show.
Yeah, no, yeah. She's playing hard to get.
I'll see what I can do.
How mad would the internet be if we forced that love vote? No. No. Not gonna happen.
I didn't know that the magic was in you.
Before we bring in Matt Leck, I need to bring in the faceless, headless voice of reason, M. Toussaint.
Hello. The quack continues.
Did you see Andy Williams is back and he says, I haven't been here in weeks. And Jason's trying to get me, dude.
Who does that on purpose? I don't know. Cruising for a bruising, this guy.
On your left says, I would be a traitor to the online left. You know what? I'm okay with that. I'm totally fine with that.
I'm fine with the thing that's not going to happen. Anyway, that's great.
When you see me in DC, you will just be so mad.
In DC. Are you allowed to go there, young man?
Coming all the way live from New York City, you know him from reading too many books, playing video games. He's the M2 son of the Majority Report. And he's the Matt Leck of Left Reckoning. Matt Leck!
Hello, everybody. I heard you say "Pod Damn America," and every once in a while, I'll hear that and think "Pod Save America."
Yes.
No,
I thought
it's a
Pascal
riff.
was on "Pod Save America." Like, check that out.
No,
No, I was
that
on
would have
Pod.
been like the time I was on NPR because they got the wrong show.
Oh, what show were they looking for?
There's a show called This Is the Revolution, and I guess it's a black guy as well. And both of us, I think, had lost our Facebook accounts. But he wrote for Guardian, and the guy, the research guy, ended up getting me on accident, and he was like, "Oh, your story is way more interesting." So I was on NPR. I forget the name of their big podcast. It was me and Shazana Zuboff.
Oh, of the surveillance capitalism.
Surveillance capitalism, yeah.
Did you rip a hole into her thesis?
Did I rip? We were on together for very short. They wanted to, because Facebook deleted my account because I wrote a thing about the last woman to get put to death, and she was mentally ill. I don't want to say the R word. M2 sign, you say it because no one knows what you look like.
No. Oh my
Ashley
God.
Frowley said it on the show and nobody cared.
She did say it. Yeah, she did.
Well, the R slur.
Slur.
Andrew Williams said, I got 3 books Matt Lett recommended. Pretty impressive.
What are
And
those?
he's been binging on books lately.
Well, speaking of Matt Leck and reading, you recently have dug into City of Quartz.
I did on the in the airport on the way back from LA. I decided I needed to know something about this place as I leave it, and it's amazing. I feel like I should have got to Mike Davis a long time ago, and I feel I don't know why. I knew Mike Davis by reputation, and like even had people quote regular things that are like Mike Davisisms. It's like when you have a friend, like friends who are really into a band before you got into them, and you feel like, well, I can't get into like Portishead now because my roommate is just like a #1 Portishead fan. But yeah, it's great. It's amazing book.
City of Quartz.
Great title.
When you read the chapter on the hammer and about policing and gang violence in basically all of California, because he talks about Oakland as well. For me, that was just like, poof, it hits home. Speaking of hitting home, we are joined. We were afraid we weren't going to be able to get him, but it looks like he was able to break free from the HR meeting over stormtrooper helmets. Deep State, Cuba.
The stormtrooper helmets thing is just what the deep state wants you to believe. I had to quell an Ewok rebellion in Sector 3. Why are you laughing? So much for so much blood.
Don't fall off the chair, Jason. Don't fall off your chair.
I think I finally positioned the chair where there's no more cords all around me. So I'm gonna fall like I did last time, because that was still the funniest shit ever. I fell, the computer fell. Just yelling hello.
And chat told you to call Nuevo Uno Uno.
You know, it's scary. I don't even know who to call if there was an emergency.
See, isn't it usually 911 or 199, 119 in most countries?
I'm just gonna yell,
Nice. Okay.
like, "Hey, y'all!"
Hey y'all, that black guy's yelling about scorpions again.
When my daughter was here, I tried to act all tough, like I wasn't scared of bugs.
Nice. She knows the real you.
Scorpions are scary. The one of the toughest guys I knew in high school, Mike Bowie. You may have met him at the wedding. He tough enough to be recruited as a lumberjack, although wise enough not to turn it down.
They recruit that?
He was working for a logging company, and it's like getting tapped for Skull and Bones or something. It's like, we think you've got what it takes to be a faller. You don't say logger, you don't say lumberjack, you say faller. And I was with him in Arizona when this tiny scorpion walked into the room that we were in, and he screamed in a register, like at an octave that I did not know he was capable of producing. Like jumped on the nearest elevated surface. It was like the Bo Burnham spider thing. And I'm like, dude, it's a bug. It's not even moving quickly. You can step on it. And he's like, you step on it. You're crazy, man. And it was the one time that my aim was true, because normally I can't sink a basket that isn't a layup. But I picked up a shoe and I threw it across the room, nailed it, hit the scorpion, one and done. It's like that was I became a man.
We should just have stories of killing stuff tonight.
Yeah.
You're rocking and rolling, buddy.
I'm going to start off the show tonight. There's something I wanted to talk to you guys about, since it's the electoral politicking season, or as we say in the podcast world, busy time. But there's some shenanigans going on in San Francisco. With election season heating up, many people that watch shows like this are going to be looking to support progressive or even socialist candidates in local or even federal races. There is hope at the ballots that the right person in a certain position can be the catalyst for transformative change in the electoral sphere, and we can oust the old guard and replace them with elected officials made in our image. Now, in San Francisco, there is some left-on-left political violence going on that caused SF supervisors to nix turning a Nordstrom's parking lot into 495 market rate units, with about 20% of those units set aside for affordable housing and even housing some unhoused citizens in the city. This from the quote from the San Francisco Examiner. In addition to replacing a parking lot with housing, the 469 Stevenson project by Build Incorporated would include 73 below market affordable units, 40% of which would be reserved for current residents of the city. The community benefits that come with this project include 4,000 square feet of ground floor retail space dedicated to local nonprofits and community serving retail. This is a quote from Lou Vasquez, main director of Build Incorporated. He also told supervisors half of that will be leased to tenants for $1 a year and the other half for $1 a foot, considerably below current market rates. In addition, Vasquez says the project would provide $579,000 in funding for community programming, a parcel of land with the capacity for up to 20 additional affordable units, and an in lieu fee equivalent to 50 more additional units, and funding for the arts, for homeless services, and for local employment programs. I'm sure all of this sounds great, and you're wondering, why would one oppose a project like this? Well, that opposition came in the form of Todd Coe and 8 members of the San Francisco Board of supervisors against the project. TADCO is the Tenants and Owners Development Corporation. They own 1,000 units of low-income housing in the South of Market, or SoMa area of San Francisco. And that is the area of 25 units. This is from the Chronicle. TADCO is taking advantage of a law that allows owners of federally funded affordable housing buildings with Section 8 subsidies to re-syndicate their debt every 20 years, recapitalizing their portfolios by SAC credits and tax-exempt bonds. During that process, a market study analyzes current market rate rents in the neighborhood and what it costs an owner to keep a building affordable. If rents skyrocket in South Market, it can create a windfall for the property owner. In the case of TADCO, it amounts to several $million, and that is according to their president. TADCO is a major player in housing in the South of Market area, and they use their war chest to be a political thorn in the side of some market rate housing builders, and they actually help support community organizations and progressive housing projects in the city. Now, the campaign to vote no on the parking lot conversion project cited environmental concerns, gentrification. Also, this no vote is a part of retaliation against board member Matt Haney, who's running against David Campos, former chief of staff for ousted SF-DA Chesa Boudin. Both leftists. Haney is running against Campos for a state assembly seat in this upcoming election. Now, is gentrification really stopped by continuing to have a valet parking lot for Nordstrom's? Need for more progressives in positions of power, but how do we reckon with this left on violence? Saw something similar in New York City. Nikki Constant, Kristen Gonzalez. What can we learn from this moving forward into this election season? Pascal, what say you about this situation?
This was a really interesting series of events for me, because what I found educational was that the internecine battling between the two proposed socialist or progressive candidates was so bad that there were enough forces to put a kibosh on the whole plan for the development project, just because the guy decided to run against Haney, decided to run against Campos. Because the sheer decision to run against him demonstrated almost this affront to a certain established wing of the Progressive Party. And I think that what this tells us is that, let's say that the progressives actually come to a point where they actually get power within the apparatus of the Democratic Party. That's not going to stop personal, professional, or aspirational decisions or egos from getting in each other's ways and having people step on toes, as we've seen in some of the elections that you mentioned. So what this demonstrates is that the politics of personality and the personality of politics don't go out the window just because a comrade is running as an opposition candidate to you in an election.
Comrade on comrade violence is tragically commonplace, and it, to a certain extent, the maximalist dreams of the revolutionary left, right, and especially people who position themselves as leftist purists, mean that even if you get a decent pragmatic concession from within the system, there's always room to trash it, since it isn't revolutionary socialism, precisely. It doesn't matter how many people are helped. It doesn't matter how much an improvement it would constitute. It doesn't matter if you're moving people from the streets or encampments into permanent housing. It's always a letdown because the intangible horizon, that mythic eschatology, that paradise is just over the horizon, and you can always accuse somebody of being too soft, even if they're delivering tangible benefits. It's a very dangerous path to tread, but unfortunately, all of us, even further removed from any tangible influence, experience it every day on Twitter. You just have to spend 5 minutes in a room with more than one leftist, and somebody will use the promised paradise as a way to beat down any actual workable proposal in the here and now.
Do you have anything you want to add, Matt?
I mean, not a whole lot besides like, yeah, it's when it comes to gentrification, it seems like you need to get rid of the gentry conditions that created gentry. And it's interesting when you have like language being used that can be used by political folks that are just, you can make these things that are fundamentally about like whose turn it is sound as if they're about broader principle. And that's a pretty I think damaging dynamic.
What was interesting to me too, and I know you guys, outside of Cuba, and I don't know the last time he's been to San Francisco, that area has a lot of unhoused people living around it. Apparently, a car mowed through a bunch of people in tents and injured several people. There's been a lot of stabbings and robberies in the area because a lot of businesses left during COVID. So the promise to bring housing in a city that has a housing crisis, which is one of the big reasons why a 1-bedroom apartment in San Francisco in this area is $3,500 a month on average. Building units, is going to put people in housing. And the environmental impact that they cited was a Reagan era bill to stop homeless shelters from being built. That was the tactic that was used. So it's interesting that you have this company, Todco, which is a nonprofit low-income housing provider. And they actually provide a lot of funding for people running against big-time billionaire-backed candidates or any sort of real estate lobby bills. They actually fund leftist projects, if you will. But one of the critiques about them has been that all this money that they're getting, they're not using it to fix up their units. They're using it to have an enormous amount of political power. And what I find interesting is I think there's a disconnect that a lot of people have when we think about politics in general, and this is even going back to Los Angeles, as so much gets focused on the race issue and racism within the city council. I mean, these are racial coalition politics. And not all these people, but a lot of those people that were in that room that have been somewhat disgraced by this, their reputations are now one person saying, some things about a council member's kid, legacies of working with their own community. That's how they got in politics in the first place, especially people like Gil. That's the guy that wrote the driver's license bill to get undocumented Californians driver's licenses so they can have jobs and not just work, under the table all the time. So, and he also wrote the the first DREAM Act. But his legacy now is going to be being in this room and not speaking out against language in a private meeting that he didn't know was being recorded.
Well, there's a line from I can't remember the source, so I'm just going to say Game of Thrones. One does not make peace with one's friends, and similarly, if you need to build coalitions, if you need to get votes, if you're horse trading, then you can't afford to play purity politics, because the person that you're calling out can kill whatever proposal you want to bring up. They can make the city council, whatever body they're on, ungovernable. And to what extent do you make nice with people that you find odious in order to deliver tangible benefits? And I mean, I know the source for this. Matt Crispin from Chapo Trap House has been pointing out that it appears that in the United States, there's such a failure of governance, a hollowing out of institutions, that the idea that you can elect somebody, that you could get political power and then use it to improve people's lives is becoming more and more fanciful. But what you can do is punish and humiliate the people you don't like. And that's the consolation prize. At least if my life isn't getting better, I can make someone I dislike suffer. And that when that's the way that people interface in these decision-making bodies, then the only thing that can sufficiently lubricate the system is money in large enough quantities so that they all get rich. And we shouldn't be surprised that the only way that any program gets passed anymore is with billions of dollars of giveaways to the most well-connected and influential groups for thousands of dollars of giveaways to everybody else.
Tucson, do you have something to add? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Pascal. I'm sorry.
I think of the axiom from the actual revolutionary leftist, Amilcar Cabral said, "We don't do these things for ideas in people's minds. We do this to improve the condition of people's lives." And I think that part of the problem we have on the left is that there are so many of us who get stuck into our vision of what is perfection, that we fail to realize is that this is about improving the condition of human beings. Now, of course, you should have principles that you don't want to sacrifice when you're negotiating with, as Cuba says, your enemies. That will render your idea nothing but simple, vapidity that works on his terms. But that's different from arguing from a position of principle and realizing that people and human beings will be improved by the work that you do to change their condition. I think that if more of us had that kind of worldview, we might go further on as a purported left.
Tucson, you want to add something to Pascal's comment?
I can't help but to notice how the not sort of a tangent, but the environmental rules to tank the project. I intensely dislike that. It's such a shame that those are there and in place for good reason. Environmental impacts are done and all of that sort of thing, and I hate the idea of it being used to just play politics. I mean, and I understand that part of politics is personalities and pettiness.
The environmental impact report, I think, was like 1,000 pages. And the environmental impact that they cited was it was going to be really tall and something about
shadows.
Yeah. It's look, I think there's a lot of underestimation about politics sometimes and overthinking about almost what was that movie with Will Smith and Gene Hackman? Enemy of the state level espionage. If it's not enemy of the state level espionage, every U.S. bad pulling all these magical strings. People kind of underestimate what really goes on, even at a local level. And we're seeing these local skirmishes become national news as these systems are being hollowed out. Yeah. That being said, Madlek, last week you wanted to talk about. I'm sorry, go ahead, Tucson. No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I just want to say I think it dissuades people from running.
You think it keeps people from running for office?
I think it dissuades people from running for office.
I think, and this is just my opinion, and you guys can call me all kinds of names in the comments. If you want to call me names, definitely leave them in the comments. Make those names count in the algorithm. And make sure you're clever. If I don't giggle, then you're not that clever. I think there was a time mostly with the boomer generation, where people felt like if you wanted to make a change in the world, you were going to make that change through the political sphere. You were going to organize unions, you were going to run for office, and that was how you were going to make substantive change. And through the financialization of the 80s, change was going to be made through your success. Philanthropic change is going to be the only way we can make change. And that's been doubled down on with tech success. Now we're seeing the political sphere even losing being an entryway into media. Maybe it always has been, but I feel like more so now. You get an instant blue check mark when you're running for office. So it's an interesting time that we're in, trying to see who is serious and legitimate. Did I depress you enough?
Well, it's also, there's an obvious question: at what point do you give up entirely and retreat to the private sphere? That was one of the characteristics of late socialism in the Eastern Bloc, that the system was so ossified, so rigid. The idea of any kind of improvement, especially after the Prague Spring and its suppression, it felt as though between then and Gorbachev that nothing could change. And as a result, the time and energy that people had to invest, they preferred to invest in their homes, in their families, in the tangible personal connections that were fundamentally private. And right now, the American system continues to have this illusion of being open, this illusion of opportunity. But as possibility fades more and more, many of the people that you would like to be on LA City Council or have some position of influence politically or economically, why would they put themselves through that for the tiny lottery ticket level of success, that tiny little chance that everything will work out and you may actually get a building built if another comrade doesn't get in your way? And you end up with, and this has been the case since the 80s in financialization, where the people who are most engaged in public processes at the municipal level, at the federal level, at the state level, are those who have a vested interest and see a very easy one-to-one correspondence of how they can translate that policy influence into their own private gain. So developers, peak corporate interests, the financial sector, and then billionaires who have the resources to individually produce social change just by buying enough of the relevant policymakers.
Well, wasn't that something they were saying about Fetterman, the guy in Philadelphia, that he used his nonprofit to circumvent getting things done through the city because he didn't like the city government?
It might be my question is, what did he get done? Because maybe that's just being smart.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of being smart, Matt Leck is pretty smart, and he's pretty tall. Can he dunk? That's the question.
I could dunk a women's ball, but I could never I could never really dunk a men's ball. I could get it in and then grab it with one hand, but no. Didn't have that kind of leaping ability at 6'2". But
Kuba can dunk. A lot of people don't know that.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I only play Ewoks.
Kuba is the Kurt Rambis to the Ewoks' Spud Webb. Jesus.
I thought
I think Tucson exploded.
that was a sound effect.
Oh, is that Tucson? Who is? Jesus. How's that noise still
16-bit.
happening? Matt, tell us about comic writer, comics, not a joke man, Alan Moore, who wrote The Watchmen.
Yeah, so I want to discuss this with you guys because I don't fully trust myself to be dispassionate about this as somebody who never really got into comic books and kind of felt like they're for nerds growing up. So when I heard Alan Moore say this thing in 2012, well, let me just get into this a little bit and then we can discuss it. So Alan Moore, guy who did The Watchmen, which I did enjoy that film. I read the graphic novel, and also V for Vendetta, which was also a big movie for me. I remember that was the first thing I ever torrented illegally. I sort of backed up the content of the film with my with learning how to do a torrent stuff.
Praxis.
Exactly, and it really like imprinted that movie onto me in a very like significant way, I think. So I appreciate those a lot. And so he's done with comics. Fast forward, and he said, "I'm definitely done with comics. I haven't written one for getting on 5 years. I always love and adore the comics medium, but the comics industry and all the stuff attached to it is just became unbearable." And he apparently had some issues with the studios. I'm not familiar with that, but what he does say politically is interesting to me. As something we're talking about, like applying larger political meanings to maybe even petty disputes. But to me, this rings true. Like when I worked for Vice News in 2015, and I was researching an episode on Hollywood, and one of the facts I came up for the panel to discuss was it was in 2015. From then until 2020, there would be a new big budget comic book movie every 2 months, and that was on schedule. And that basically happened. We're on the other side of that now, and I hate all of it. I don't have any interest in any of these movies. I do feel like they're for kids, and I'll just continue with what
you just lost the left.
This is why I want to get you guys. So Moore says hundreds of thousands of adults are lining up to see characters and situations that had been created to entertain the 12-year-old boys, and it was always 12-year-old boys of 50 years ago. I didn't really think that superheroes were adult fare. I can share this actually. Here we go. If you want to put that up, Jason. I didn't really think that superheroes were adult fare. I think that this was a misunderstanding born of what happened in the 1980s, to which I must put up my hand to considerable share of blame, though it was not intentional. When things like The Watchmen were first appearing, there were an awful lot of headlines saying comics have grown up. I tend to think that no, comics hadn't grown up. There were a few titles that were more adult than people were used to, but the majority of comic titles were pretty much the same as they'd ever been. It wasn't comics growing up. I think it was more comics meeting the emotional age of the audience coming the other way. And then he said, I said around, and this is where I first sort of became familiar with Moore. I said around about 2011 that I thought it had serious and worrying implications for the future if millions of adults were queuing up to see Batman movies, because that kind of infantilization, that urge towards simpler times, simpler realities, that can very often be a precursor to fascism. He points out that when Trump was elected in 2016, and when we ourselves took a bit of a strange detour in our politics, many of the biggest films were superhero movies. So that I like that. And I'm just wondering, is he being fair? What are your guys' relationship with sort of comic culture? To me, I feel like it is a symptom. Obviously, it's not. It's definitely not the cause. I think we didn't have a great culture before the last 10 years of comic book stuff. I'm just curious what you guys think about him drawing that connection between the far right and infantilization. And you see a lot of these people online, they're like, this is what they took from us, and it's like a picture of like a Super Nintendo and shit like that. And
I think there is an interesting connection. Kuba and I did a show a while back. Me, Kuba, and Jean actually will watch Marvel and Star Wars stuff. When we have time, we'll watch it, and then we'll actually talk about it. And of course, Gene plays games and is even more into that world. But me and Kuba did a show after the Falcon and Winter Soldier show because that show had a lot of potential to be interesting with the Flag Smashers. Remember the Flag Smashers? If you know about the whole snap and half the population goes away, the storyline was, well, they came back, but while they were gone, certain nations needed help. Israel's like, look, we lost half our people. We fucking, hey, you guys want us to not fuck with you, Palestine? So all these warring nations found peace in losing half the population, right? In rebuilding a world for 5 years. And then after 5 years, everyone comes back. So there became a militant faction called the Flag Smashers that were trying to bring it back to what it was like in 5 years when everyone was gone, when there was peace and there were no borders. That was another thing that was a really big point in that series, that this was a borderless world that we had lived in for 5 years, according to the comics. And then it made a pivot, as Kuba said, to kind of turning the Flag Smashers into something maybe aspirational, into Al-Qaeda.
Every enemy of the status quo eventually defaults to Al-Qaeda. That's part of the infantilism of superhero comics, and I think that Alan Moore's best stuff is what he did, like From Hell, or I think that there is a sub-genre or a segment of comic book culture which is much more serious, much more symbolic, much more abstract. A lot of the Image or Vertigo titles can afford to be more thoughtful, speculative, introspective, and they never really break out, which is fine. But it's, when we talk about comic culture, it's really Marvel to a certain extent, DC,
Image.
Yes, the kind of the Spawns, the Walking Dead, the blockbusters, which generally are genre storylines with high production values. And that's what type of movies they turn into as well. And sometimes they're fun. They're always colorful. You can see the formula being adhered to in real time. Every once in a while, you see the glimmerings of an original idea or something daring that then gets wrapped back up. The only comic book property that I was surprised by was a Legion, which was on FX, which is technically an offshoot of Marvel. It's a spinoff, but it was basically, they gave a bunch of very talented art school kids a bottomless budget, and then they just ran with it, and they produced something like a bewildering but beautiful and intricate dreamscape. Very much art for art's sake. I'm not suggesting anybody go there for agitprop, but so it is original and it is striking. It is bracing.
Well, I think we forget that Superman in 1979 was a game.
Yeah, The Boys is fine. That's
I still haven't seen it. But Superman was a game changer, Matt, in my opinion, for superhero movies moving forward. And when I say game changer, I mean being able to produce a child story and have it have an emotional connection for adults. If you think about Superman, and even if you watch those old serials from the 40s and 50s, it's very silly, right? This guy not really flying, that's mildly overweight, bending plastic or rubber guns in a knot. And and telling kids to, eat their vegetables is kind of what Superman is in its early iteration. And by 79, there's this deep story that you get that I don't remember if it won any awards, but I know it definitely was nominated for awards. Might have won a special effects award. And then you get its sequel, and you get Batman in 89, which also the first Batman was in that same vein, a child story that is dark and gritty enough to connect with an adult audience. And Marvel learned moving forward that you can now have it all. You can have the 12-year-old child as well as the 40-year-old child, to the point where there's even a toy market aimed at 40-year-old children like myself. So it's been kind of interesting to watch. And there's a great interview with Todd Phillips, I believe his name is, who made the Joker. And I was hesitant on seeing the Joker because I actually did read a lot of the press that came out about it, saying that it was this horrible movie and it was pro incel and all this other stuff. And then I heard an interview with the guy that actually wrote it and made it. And he said that he was at a premiere of a movie that he knew was going to flop. And as he was walking around talking to his agent about what he was going to do next with his career, because he knew this movie he made was a flop, he looked up and saw a billboard for a superhero movie. And he felt like, kind of how you feel, this crap is taking over. And the only way I can tell a real story about neoliberalism is if I mask it in a superhero story. And he started kind of spitballing this idea of the Joker as a hero and Batman's father as a villain. And it took years to get made, as these things do, but it did get made. I did watch Joker. I thought it was pretty good. I watched what was that? Go ahead.
Joker is European socialist realism pretending to be a comic book movie. That's what makes it good. It's about institutions failing. It's about the psychology of a young man. It's about the crisis of masculinity, how people unravel under pressure. And he only puts on the makeup in the last act. So you go in there thinking that you're going to be seeing Batman clubbing an evildoer to death, but it ends up being an examination of society in decay.
Hey, that's what I mean. It's interesting you say that, because like that.
Oh, depressing as hell. It's very bleak. I mean, it's not a good time. Don't go on a date to see the Joker unless she's a very special lady, unless they are a very special person.
Right. But it's funny because like the things that I've enjoyed sort of related to this genre are the Joker, I thought was good. Deadpool, which is like a satire of all this stuff, and The Boys, which is also sort of a satire of all the things. And it's just interesting to me, like, because I studied Westerns, like how Westerns became sort of the hegemonic cultural expression during Vietnam, for instance. And you're talking about like military interventionism and we're the good guys with guns and that sort of thing. It's just interesting to like, for me to like theorize like why certain things are happening at the same time. And like, those are so different than like these massive, the ones that I never watch are like the big, and I guess I've seen the first Thor movie, that was kind of funny, but like where they're all coming out of like portals in the universe and like confronting like the bad guy in the Milky Way. Like, I don't know. It's just wild to me, like how that has such a, I guess it's colors and explosions and stuff like that. I mean, I enjoy Pacific Rim.
It's the Fast and the Furious.
Are you a fan of the Frankfurt School at all? Or are you kind of not into their analysis of popular culture and its utility in capitalism, one-dimensional?
Yeah, I mean, I read the Frankfurt School. Like, there was some of the first sort of like downstream of Marxist things I was exposed to in grad school. But I genuinely, like, haven't read in a while.
Oh, okay. So I
She-Hulk
mean,
is
because
great.
you asked a good question. He's like, do these things have the possibility to create a reactionary tendency? And I think
Mm,
that when we look at the production in terms of how the state interfaces with media at some capacity, and how propagating certain ideas exists within the capacity to maintain certain hegemony of notions within the body politic, I think there's a possibility that there is a kind of reactionary kind of attachment to certain narratives that people can develop over time. I don't think it has to be completely conspiratorial per se, but I don't think that in complex societies that things like media, image, film, advertisement, marketing exist outside the apparatuses of actual social control.
I mean, to go back to City of Quartz, Mike Davis has a section I'm just getting through now about noir and the
Hmm.
sort of and the sort of misperceptions you might have and what was actually going on in Los Angeles. So interesting.
And I think that there's also a relatively small number of um, basic narratives that get recycled and refracted and reskinned. So there's Superman, which is a god hero will save us. There's Batman, which is you have to break the rules and take things into your own hands. Um,
Mm,
and those building blocks can sometimes tap into political, ideological dispositions and amplify them. But that's not necessarily the purpose going in. You're just defaulting to one of the 5 or 6 fundamental superhero narratives. Uh, the It's interesting how much the Punisher gets embraced by, for instance, law enforcement. Right? There's no shortage of police bros with the skull logo, and the whole ethos of it is that the police suck too much to do their job, so you have to do it for them. Um, and I think that that's a case where you do have an that quasi-fascist ideological affinity beginning to bleed into having real-world consequences, even if the original had no political aspirations or motivations behind it.
MT, you want to add something? Or not?
is MT behind us again? And in time, maybe.
She's doing meeting out some vigilante justice.
Just dishing out vigilante justice. I think she's having problems with her audio. She's having tech issues. So I will not leave your MT will leave her comments in the chat. She has a lot to say. So much like Terminator X, she's going to say it with her hands.
But one, Alan Moore, a fun fact, he has mostly been writing erotic fairy tales with esoteric chaos magic subtexts. That's what he does when he doesn't do comics.
Cool, but
And I wish him the best for it.
that. Let's not ask how you know that, Kuba. My.
Google alerts, but I'll let you guess what the terms are.
Now, Kuba, what are you talking about today? And I hate to be that guy, but you're going to have to make it somewhat quick.
So the U.S. government is planning on introducing fast-track legislation for defense procurement, allowing weapons manufacturers and other major defense contractors to lock in multi-year contracts, often non-competitive, in order to resupply the materiel that's been depleted by the war in Ukraine and all of the NATO transfers. to Ukrainian forces in that fight. And one, this is essentially a rearmament bill. You're creating the conditions for a massive scale up of defense spending and an increase in U.S. armaments overall. Two, it reflects the underlying strategic economic weakness of NATO compared to Russia in this conflict. The fact that a war, which granted has gone on for 2.5 years, but it's limited to a single theater, single adversary, has drawn down weapon stockpiles, not just in the United States, but across NATO countries. For instance, Germany is having to scrub some of its own rearmament plans just because of shortage of available weapon systems and waiting times to purchase new ones. That we can see an imbalance, an industrial imbalance between the two sides. We don't know how much longer the NATO side can sustain supporting Ukraine to the extent that it has, simply because of the difficulties in producing material at scale, at speed. Russia has revamped enough of its Soviet-era industrial base so that it can indigenously produce relatively quickly, relatively cheaply, replacement parts, as well as munitions and small arms for its own forces. It can also tap in stockpiles from countries as diverse as China, North Korea, Iran, the Middle East, because of the wide dispersal of Soviet legacy systems in the non-Western aligned world. Finally, this is another place where the energy weapon and sanctions on commodities and fuels produced by Russia is coming back to impact the West's own industrial capability. Major consumers of energy are things like the steel industry or automobiles, heavy machinery, and these are precisely the industries that are essential to maintaining and developing military supplies and advanced weapon systems. These are severely impacted by the rising cost of energy, especially in Europe, as well as other strategic commodities shortages. So you have the industry that you need to rearm Europe shutting down in Europe as a result of the economic consequences of the war. Now, it's an open question of whether there's enough of a commitment to the fight in Ukraine among European leaders, especially, to divert scarce resources from consumer needs and public goods into munitions and weapons. But that looks like what it might take if you want to achieve your military targets and your military goals with respect to Ukraine and Russia. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Pascal and Matt, you guys have anything to add?
There's too much to think about in one turn, man.
Matt, do you have anything you want to add?
Let's see. I'll try to nibble in somewhere. Yeah, I guess my no, I don't know. I don't know where to even begin. Like it's interesting to me. Like the things that stuck out to me were these big giant war companies want the signal from the government, and my understanding is like that. Basically, we're saying we're going to replenish these reserves non-competitively. So massive. What's that? Lawmakers are expecting this war to last. Right. Yeah. But it's just interesting. Like we can Lockheed Martin or whatever, like, we'll help, but just you need to send us a signal, and that signal is like years of non-competitive profit. But
yeah, we'd love to save democracy, but shareholders.
I mean, what all this tells me is that, as Kuba has indicated, that these guys are in it for the long haul, and that this is not going to be a short skirmish, or they don't plan it to be a short skirmish. So, what does that mean for all of the chess players on the board? All of this talk about multipolarity, changing the paradigm, America's position in the world as the global hegemon of record, the rise of China, all of this stuff, the condition of China and Russia vis-a-vis Africa, the rest of the continent, all of these questions still are left unanswered, and we're still in this period of chaos while we're using Ukraine as a proxy for a fight with Russia.
And I'd also point out that just because they plan on this being a long conflict, even if Ukraine dies down, these are going to be the vehicles for remilitarizing the United States for the next theater or the potential China war. But just because that's what they expect doesn't mean that's what's going to happen. For instance, the Europeans may simply experience what this type of remilitarization costs them, starting in November, December, and by February they want to throw in the towel. There's no appetite for that level of. We're not even talking about austerity, because it's not budget cuts across the board. It's transfers from families, individuals, consumers, cities, communities into the hands of the military and military producers.
Right.
That's not that easy a sell to a public that already is facing war fatigue. So the goal the goal has been set up as a maximalist, sort of Atlanticist military industrial complex fever dream. And they could very well get away with it, right? This isn't Scooby-Doo. There's no guaranteed happy ending. But incompetence is also a thing, and they may fail. Not because the good guys triumph, but because they underestimated the opportunism of the European far right, or the resilience of American industry. For instance, there might be labor shortages that cripple the ability for steel production in the United States to phase up to adequate levels, possibly. There's all of these variables that we certainly don't have the time and the resources to go all the way down that rabbit hole. And here's the thing, neither does the Pentagon, right? It's not that they couldn't if they wanted to, it's that they would rather do other things because it's too depressing if you start. So these plans could fail, but we are seeing, as you said, Pascal, a long-term vision for a global conflict.
What is the blowback? And now we are over an hour, so this is part of the champagne room. This is really what patrons get. We take deeper dives. So if you are new to This Is Revolution, or you're not a patron, or get to be part of the champagne room, you're witnessing some champagne right now.
That's what she said.
Sorry, I just want to hit it.
I was expecting the more you know harp strings.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to hit that one because it's funny. Is there going to be a far right blowback? I was actually watching something before we went on. Vice put out this thing about the history of the far right in America and how a lot of it is tied up with the military, going all the way back to the Civil War. So do you think that there is going to be a European blowback a la Vietnam era, where you start to get an even larger outgrowth, because now you have a militarized, very well militarized far right?
I don't think that I think that the demilitarization of Europe is something that is difficult for Americans to imagine because the United States is so disproportionately militarized compared to almost virtually any country in the world. The footprint of how many soldiers the United States has maybe doesn't seem that extravagant comparatively, but the space that the military has economically, culturally, dwarfs anything in Europe. Even the French with their Bastille Day parades. It's the influence of the military on the rest of society, on the national imagination, is much lower. And they're not going to get anywhere near a draft either, which is typically the vector that converts war fatigue into protest. But if there's differential energy prices for military industry versus people heating their homes so they don't freeze, that actually could serve as that vector to turn opposition to war into a popular issue. My anxiety is that the energy of that opposition will be channeled into identitarian far-right movements. You'll have Marine Le Pen come out as not anti-war as much as pro-Putin. And that's very dangerous because you end up with an opposition to the conflict in Ukraine, which isn't grounded in a pursuit of peace, but like #NotMyWar. We shouldn't be fighting Russians. We should be fighting Muslims. We shouldn't be sinking the Moskva in the Black Sea. We should be sinking refugee boats in the Mediterranean. And it's a little like the Pod Save America guys had like a blind squirrel finding a nut, had a good take on the attacks on AOC related to the Ukraine letter. If you attack indiscriminately anyone on the left, anyone in the Democratic Party who advocates a diplomatic solution, then you're giving Tucker Carlson a monopoly on peace. And
Love that.
And that is something that I dread because the consequences of it are dire. Even if you get the peace that you want, you're also going to get more conflict that you don't. And it's going to empower some of the worst people in the political spectrum.
Tucson, do you have anything to say in closing?
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. That's great. It's been a lot of tech issues. I wanted you to expand on something, Guba. What the PodSave people said. And why were you listening to PodSave anyway?
It's his favorite show.
Well, one doesn't choose the files that they are assigned. The
Tucker Carlson peace thing. I wanted to, if you could expand on that.
Right now, Tucker Carlson, he has very effectively captured an anti-systemic right critique of not just the Biden administration, but kind of the established system of American liberal democracy. It's what we've heard before many times: globalists, socialists, minorities, right? And the proposals are America first. We have to look after our own people. Welfare for the worthy, support for the worthy, Christians, families, whites, but certainly native-born Americans, not immigrants. And that we have these Atlanticist, globalist, warmongers in the deep state or unelected establishment that are driving these conflicts for their own ends, and they don't like you, real Americans. That critique leads him to certain policy positions which aren't always crazy. For instance, maybe we shouldn't be fighting a war in Ukraine. Maybe ending the war is a good idea. Now, if he gets credit for it, because he's the only person with a major platform making that final argument, not talking about the giant iceberg of reactionary ideology below it, just the peace in Ukraine argument, then people it's kind of like the one issue voter thing. If that's the most important thing for you, and he's the only one making that argument, well, regardless of how you feel about the rest of the iceberg, he's your choice. And maybe you can hope that once he or his anointed political candidates make the deal with Putin and establish peace, we can get rid of them and return to sanity, or Barack Obama or whoever. But that one positive item could be the Trojan horse that allows a reactionary program to become the dominant agenda for the United States. And not only that, but if you deliver that peace, then you have massive political capital in order to implement that reactionary agenda.
I see. Thank you so much for that.
And again,
I feel like I should apologize because it's just depressing, right? I've ruined everyone's day, but
Cuba, look.
I mean, you see the right salivating over the opportunity to achieve that monopoly. Just Tucker's the only one saying it.
It's going to be interesting midterms.
It's going to be real interesting midterms. But I thank you, Matt, for joining us. I want to ask you, I know it is late where you are in NYC, but we're going into our champagne room, and I wasn't sure if Bajlan had hit you up earlier and asked if you were going to join us as we talked about the live show.
Oh, I'm going to duck out, unfortunately. But,
I know it's late.
It was great to see you guys.
Blame Griscom.
Blame Griscom.
Yeah.
That's the hashtag. Blame
Griscom.
But I think this was a very good news show. We went over, so you guys got bonus material, and I think we killed it.
Here it comes!
That's audio from me dunking on Ewoks.
Thank you guys so much. I will not be in Saturday, as I will be making my journey up north to the Bay Area to see my kid. Very excited for. It's Halloween. It's going to be a fireman. Called me this morning, 6:30, in his fireman costume and with a whistle. I didn't know the costume came with a whistle, which he proceeded to blow very loudly and showed me his fireman axe. He said, "Daddy, this isn't for hurting people. It's for helping people." Right? So,
I mean, context based.
Some people have too many fingers.
So that's what I'll be doing. And Pascal and Toussaint are going to do a show all about Kanye West on Saturday. So
I wouldn't go that far.
It's not directly about Kanye.
It's all Kanye all the time. Nigga, what? Exactly. That's what I said.
Hopefully, we can offer some commentary that hasn't been given yet.
Oh, I definitely think there will be commentary that hasn't been given yet. But it's not going to be all about Kanye, but there's definitely going to be Kanye talk. So if you guys want to jump in Saturday, 9 a.m. Pacific time,
12
p.m.
Eastern.
everyone else on the screen's time.
Mm.
And on that note, we are out.
Out.